Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Are your images not sharp? Perhaps they are sharp some of the times, but other times they come out blurry, or you zoom in and one image is sharp and the other one isn't. Perhaps your shutter speed isn't correct. Maybe you're using stabilization on a tripod and that maybe causes some issues. Well, in this episode, we're going to be talking about all of those things to help you get the sharpest image both in camera and maybe some bonus tips on how to create beautiful sharp images in post-processing using some of the tools there. So with that, let's get started. If you are new to this channel, my name is Shannon and I'm a full-time photographer in beautiful British Columbia. Whether you're here to learn, be inspired, or simply enjoy some stunning visuals, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is being in focus. If you're not in focus, well then you're not going to be sharp. Now, if you are in focus, it doesn't mean your images are sharp. It just means you're in focus. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can pull focus. One is manually, and I like turning on the peak highlights with my manual focus. That makes it so that I can see where the focus is so that I'm in focus when I take the shot. Now for autofocus, you can do a single point, which when you push the button, it'll lock focus. A lot of the times your icon will turn like green and it'll even make a little beep sound if you have your sound turned on. This is great for stationary objects, landscapes, but not great for something that's moving. You might be out of focus when the object moves towards you or away from you. This is when you want to switch over to continuous so that it's constantly focusing on your subject wherever it's moving. So that's focus. So hopefully we got that down and we can move on to how to keep your images nice and sharp while you're in focus. Let's talk about shutter speed. There is a rule of thumb that you set your shutter speed to 1 over your focal length. So if you have a 500 mil, you are shooting 1/500th of a second for your shutter speed. This is great to cancel out you, the photographer's movement. This does not help with your subject moving really fast. So that might be a good default to start with, is the 1 over your focal length rule of thumb. But there's a few other things to consider here. One, we're moving, and depending on how you're holding your camera, you might move around quite a bit. Two, your subject might be moving, and it might be moving very fast or quite slow. That's going to change your shutter speed. Three, the vessel or wherever you're standing on or sitting might be moving as well. So if you were someone shooting from a moving boat, or you're up in a plane or a helicopter, you need to take into consideration the movement or vibrations that that vessel is going to have on your camera. So I think as far as the default goes, you want to shoot 1 over your focal length. If your subject is moving quite fast, moving birds, well then you want to increase your shutter speed depending on how fast the movement of that bird is. You also have to think about how far away your subject is. The closer it is to you, any of those movements are going to be a lot quicker across your focal plane. So the closer they are, you need to have a higher shutter speed. So we talked about shutter speed, 1 over your focal length, but you could probably reduce that. One is the stabilization, which we'll talk about in a minute, but 2 is how you're holding your camera. I actually like having my foot here for the tripod up top so that I have my whole hand down below to help stabilize it. I know other people like having it down below, but I feel like there's a little bit of movement. It's not nearly as stable for me. Let me know down in the comments if this is the way you shoot or if you prefer the way that I do with this up. But having your elbows in tight to your body is going to reduce the amount of movement you have. The next thing you want to do is look through your viewfinder. You have better stabilization looking through here, taking photographs, than you are looking at the back of your LCD screen and seeing what's happening here. Another thing is controlling your breathing. This is very important for video because I need to be able to capture a long enough moment that it looks good, that I'm not jerking around like some Jason Bourne movie. So I control my breathing by deep in and out breaths and then I follow my subject. This is also great for photos too, for keeping consistent with your composition and getting the shot that you want. Stabilization. With newer cameras, especially mirrorless, we got incredible stabilization. Now, that is going to help for your movement, not for your subject's movement. So no matter what, if you have wildlife that's moving really fast, you need to be able to compensate for a fast shutter speed. But for yourself, the internal stabilization is going to do a great job of smoothing out any of your, nasty little shakes. This is also going to be nice if you're up in a plane or a helicopter or on a boat. It's going to help stabilize some of that movement. Now, so for some of us who are shooting on lenses that have stabilization that we can turn on, we want to make sure that it has a tripod mode if our camera is mounted to a gimbal or video head. If it doesn't have a tripod mode, the stabilization might actually work against you and sort of work counterintuitively. It's trying to stabilize your lens, but if your lens is mounted to a solid structure or to a tripod, it's going to work against it. So that might be one case where you want your stabilization to be turned off unless it has a tripod mode. Now, another time when you might want to turn off your stabilization is when you're photographing faster than 1/500th of a second. Shutter speeds that are a lot faster than this sort of get interrupted by the stabilization. Now, for my older camera body and lenses, I found that this was something to be true. I looked at my images in my burst, and I found that every once in a while there was a bit of a blurrier one, and I think it was because my stabilization was sort of moving things when it shouldn't be for such a fast shutter speed. Now, for my Z9 and my newer lenses, I never saw any issues there. I was following my subject, doing a burst. Everything was turned on as far as stabilization goes, and I never seemed to have any issues. I shoot both photos and video, and stabilization for video is key. So I kept it on. One thing that stabilization's also great for is stabilizing before you even take the photo. So looking around, seeing the wildlife, especially if it's a bunch of birds flying all around, it's really chaotic. It's nice to be able to look through the viewfinder and see things fairly stable because the stabilization's on. As soon as I take the photo, it either works for me or against me. And for the Z9, especially paired with this S lens, I didn't see any issues there. Now, video, I definitely want it on all the time. I compromise and allow stabilization to be on. Let me know down in the comments if you've ever seen any issues between one image and the next with stabilization being on with a shutter speed faster than 1/500th of a second. Shooting in good light. When you have beautiful highlights paired with some nice shadows, you're going to get really sharp images. You want to make sure that you're up right at sunrise and then also going out maybe in the evening. But I will say if you have a lot of heat haze, then maybe the evening is not the best and you're only relying on those beautiful, perfect, cool mornings. But having good light is so crucial to creating nice highlights and shadows that will in turn create sharp images. When we get closer to the summertime, the evenings are going to be a mayhem of heat haze, and you're going to have struggles, even if the lighting is really good, capturing a sharp image. If that's the case in the evening, try and go into cool areas like, the woods. Sometimes out over the open ocean or a lake could be better in the evening time when it's cooled off a bit. But you want to watch out for big open plains, pavement, concrete, things that are going to retain heat and release it even into the evening. All of that heat haze is going to soften your images and it's going to look pretty crappy. Okay, next let's talk about a clean image. And by that I mean all the different filters that you add on to your camera is going to add another probability of softer images because every piece of glass has got dust on it. It's got spots on it. There's little inconsistencies on clarity. And so why would you want to add more glass to your lens if you don't have to. This is why I don't shoot with those UV filters on the front. I just remove them. Less glass, the better for me, unless I'm trying to manipulate the image, like, removing reflections by using a polarizer. But cleaning your glass is very important. Any of those smudges, any oils and stuff you want to remove, and that also includes your image sensor. Okay, next let's talk about aperture. Now, there is a saying that you don't want to be photographing at your lens's limits or extremes. So that is wide open or all the way down at, in this case, f/22. For the really small aperture, you'll get diffraction and create soft edges, including really, really low light. Now, we're photographing wildlife. We want a lot of light, so we want to be shooting wide open. So, is that a good aperture to photograph at? Well, it might depend on your lens. So there are charts online. You can look up your lens and see where its sharpest aperture is. If you can't find it online, well, then you'll have to just test out in the field. Just put something up at a certain distance and try all your different f-stops and go ahead and compare all of those images. Now, a lot of newer lenses, the wide open aperture is just as sharp as it is in the middle at around, say, f/8. So I don't have too much concern when I'm photographing wildlife wide open on these lenses. So another problem that people might have is that their lens needs to be calibrated. And bringing your lens off to get calibrated could cost a lot of money and it could take a long time. So sometimes our camera bodies are set up so that it can auto fine-tune your lens just in case it's a little bit off. Maybe you focused on the eyes and you always notice that the nose is more in focus than the eyes. Or maybe it's the ears that are a little bit further. No matter what, it always seems to be a bit off, either a little bit in the front of where you indicated or a little bit in the back. So you can go into your menu. Here on the Nikon Z9, you just go down into the setup menu. Then you locate AF fine tuning option. And if you go down to default, you'll see the camera and then a little mountain icon here. And you can actually push your autofocus a little bit further into the background or a little bit closer towards you. On this lens, I've actually had to move it about 5 points towards me. I always found that it was missing the focus and it was a little bit off to the back. Now, the cool thing is that it will just program this lens when it's connected because it understands that it's a 500 f4 that's connected to this camera body. So when I go to connect another lens, it's not adding that same +5 to that other lens because I don't want it to happen to all of my lenses. They're not all needing to be recalibrated. It's just the one older lens. Now, we talked about a clean sensor and a clean lens. Another thing that you can do on your camera is actually have the camera clean its own sensor. Now, if you go again into the setup menu, you can go all the way down to clean image sensor. And this is where you can go ahead and hit start, or you can set up an automatic cleaner. Now, what this just does is shake your image sensor really, really fast. And so if there's any dust, things that'll fall off your image sensor, that's the time it'll do it. But it won't take care of any of the moisture or smudge marks or any sort of spots that are going to be really tough to shake off. That you'll need to use an image sensor cleaning kit to go ahead and wipe your sensor. You can have your camera taken to a camera store and have them clean it. I think here in Victoria it costs about $80. But yeah, it's fairly easy to clean your own sensor, but I can understand you're dealing with thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment. You don't want to screw anything up. Okay, I'm here on the computer. Let's talk about ISO because we're dealing with fast shutter speeds when we're photographing fast wildlife to freeze the action. And so our ISO has to be cranked up to be able to expose our image. Now, sometimes we'll go out into the field and we'll underexpose thinking that we can just fix it in post. But I've got two images here, one that's taken at a lower ISO and it's quite underexposed and we can bump it up in post. and we have one that is properly exposed, but the ISO is cranked to 12,800. And if I were to zoom in, there's quite a bit of noise here. But let's take a look at what it looks like when I have to brighten this up to the same exposure. Even though this has an ISO of 1250, it still has just as much noise or more noise than the other image. So even here, I'm shooting on a Nikon Z9. The image sensor does an incredible job at retaining detail. And comparing the two, one shot at 1250 ISO and the other one's 12,800. So it's way more. And when we have to bump things up, our ISO isn't the issue. So where we get noise is the lack of light. So don't think that a lower ISO is going to solve your noise issue. It's typically better to crank up your ISO to properly expose in the field than it is to work in post-processing to bring up the exposure later on. There are a few programs where you can go ahead and remove the noise. One is in Lightroom. They have a denoise down in the details panel. You can also use Topaz Labs. There's Photo AI, denoise from Topaz. There's a bunch of other programs that'll help you remove noise. Now, that's noise. What can we do in post-processing to kind of help with sharpening our images? Because they are raw, we got a ton of information there, but they're a bit dull, bland, and we need to bring them back to life for what was there in the field. Now, shooting in good light is important. We talked about that. But in post-processing, we can also manipulate that light to better create a sharper image. And that's by brightening up the highlights, maybe darkening some of the shadows, incorporating a little bit of contrast. And if we're in Lightroom, we have texture here that we can up a little bit, which will bring a little bit of texture back into our image. The clarity slider, I would really watch it. I hardly use the clarity slider just because it does a really bad job of over intensifying the edges so that it doesn't really look good. So when you're editing, be sure to be specific. Don't do global adjustment. We want to keep things that should be soft, keeping them soft, and the things that we want sharpened, like details of feather or fur, the eyes, we want to go ahead and just help enhance that. Now, I know this is a lot of information, which is why I created a free document for you guys to download. There's a link down in my description. You can print it, you can put it in your backpack and use it as a checklist so that you guys can create stunning, sharp images. Well, if you like editing tutorials like this, I got more of those and I'll pop them up here on the screen. I've also got adventures into the field where I photograph wildlife and landscape moments. So you can check those out as well. If you like this content, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments how you create sharp images. Everyone would love to hear from you. And if you aren't subscribed, think about subscribing. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you on the next episode. Ciao.